Unit 1 and Unit 2 for your semester test. Okay, so if I'm looking at number 1, the first thing I need to do is graph this linear equation. Okay, and we need to remember y equals mx plus b. B is your y-intercept, and m is your slope. Okay, so when I come in here, I got to start at my y-intercept, which in this case is 2. So I'm going to put a point at 2, and then my slope is this negative that's hanging out here, but I'm going to make that a negative 1 over 1. So I'm going to go down 1 over 1. And you need to make sure that your line is decreasing because your slope is negative. You do not have to write this on your test, but I would just go double check that this line is decreasing, which if I go and check it, if I go and trace it from left to right, it is decreasing. All right, number 2, I've got y equals 3. This is a special one. We've got to remember the word hoi, which tells me it is going to be a horizontal line. So I'm going to go to 3 on the y-axis. I'm going to draw a point, and I'm going to draw a horizontal line. All right, on number 3, my y-intercept is 1, so I'm going to start at 1. My slope is the number in front of this x, which in this case is a 1 over 1. So I'm going to go up 1, over 1, up 1, right 1, because this line has to be from left to right increasing. So if I go and trace it with my finger from left to right, it is going up, so I know I'm good to go because it is increasing. All right. Down here, we basically have to follow these big long steps to get all the way to our x and y intercepts. All right, on number 4, I got to find my slope first. Well, I've got 2 points, x1, y1, x2, y2, and I'm going to put them into my slope formula. All right, so when I write this, I'm going to have my y2 is 3 minus a negative 4 over my x2 is 0 minus negative 2. All right, so when I write this, I'm going to put this in my calculator, and I'm going to get, I'm going to get a slope of 7 over 2. All right, from slope, I've got to put it into point slope, which is this equation right here. All right, and I'm just going to rewrite this as y minus, my y1 is a negative 4. Remember, if it's negative here, when I put it into the equation, I've got to make it positive, equals m, which is your slope. We already found our slope, which is 7 over 2, parentheses, x, and then my x1 is a negative 2, so when I put this in here, it's got to become positive. All right, so there we are in point slope. Now I got to get it to slope intercept, which is y equals mx plus b, okay? To do that, I'm going to have to distribute my 7 over 2. This is when you're just going to use your fraction button in your calculator. So I'm going to have y plus 4 equals 7 over 2x plus 7. But remember, in slope-intercept, you've got to get this y all by itself. So I'm going to have to subtract 4 from both sides. And I'm going to end up with y equals 7 over 2x plus 3. All right? That guy right there is in slope-intercept. Now I got to get them to standard. And the big thing on standard is no fractions. And x and y have to be together. All right, so I've got to move this 7 over 2 back over. So I'm going to subtract it from both sides. And I'm going to write it over here. I'm going to have a negative 7 over 2x plus y equals 3. Okay, the thing you have to remember here is no fractions. So to undo this fraction, I'm going to multiply my whole equation by 2. Okay, you're going to put this in your calculator. Let your calculator do all the work. So I'm going to have a negative 7x plus 2y equals 6. Okay, to go find my x-intercept, that means your y is 0, so you're going to end up having negative 7x equals 6. Divide both sides by a negative 7, and you're going to have x equals 6 over negative 7. Remember, you've got to write that as a point. To find my y-intercept, well, y'all, I'd already found my y-intercept right here in slope-intercept form, so I can just take that point of 0, 3, Or if you want to solve, you could set 2y equal to 6, divide both sides by 2, and you still get y equals 3. Okay? Same idea over here, okay? It says an x-intercept of 3 and a y-intercept of 15. So the first thing we need to do is write that as a point. So if I have an x-intercept of 3, that's going to be 3, 0. And if I have a y-intercept of 15, that's going to be 0, 15. All right, now I need to go find the slope. So I'm going to go in and label x1, y1, x2, y2. So I'm going to have 15 minus 0 over 0 minus 3. When you put that in your calculator, you end up getting a slope of negative 5, I'm pretty sure. Let me double check. Yes, your slope is negative 5. All right, now we're going to put it in point slope. So I'm going to have y minus my y1, in this case is 0, equals my slope, which I've already found, which is negative 5, parentheses, x minus my x1, which is 3. If it's a positive 3 here, it becomes negative when I put it into the equation. Okay? To undo these parentheses, I know I'm going to have to distribute this negative 5. So I'm going to have y minus 0 equals negative 5x plus 15. And then to get this y by itself, you would just add 0. But y'all, I know if I add 0, it's just going to stay y equals negative 5x plus 15. All right, to get this to standard form, I have to get my x and my y together. So I'm going to start by adding 5x to both sides. And I'm going to end up with 5x plus y equals 15. I don't have to do any sort of multiplication here because I don't have any fractions. So I'm good to go. I'm in standard form. Okay, to find your x-intercept, you're going to come set 5x equal to 15. Divide both sides by 5. You're going to get x equals 3. Remember to write that as a point, which is 3, 0. Now, if you remember this problem, it actually already told you that you had an x-intercept of 3. But I just know I'm good now because I double-checked 3, 0 matches my x-intercept here. And if I wanted to double-check here, I would come in and here set y equal to 15. Well, that's already solved for you. So your y-intercept would be 0, 15. Which if you want to come in and double-check, it already told you had a y-intercept of 15. Which matches what we got here. Okay? All right, 6, 7, and 8 wants to know if they're parallel, perpendicular, or neither. Okay? So, remember, if they're parallel, they have these same slopes. And if they are perpendicular, they are opposite reciprocals, which means you flip and change sign. All right, so we basically have to go in and find the slope on both of these. So we got lucky because this first equation right here already told me that the slope is negative 4. This guy is not in slope-intercept form. I got to get him there so I can find the slope. So I'm going to start by subtracting 2x from both sides. I'm going to have 8y equals negative 2x plus 10. Okay, to get this y by itself, I'm going to divide everything by 8. And I'm going to end up with y equals, this is when you're going to use your fraction button, a negative 1 over 4x plus 10 over 8. When I come in here and look at the slope, I get a negative 1 over 4. That's my slope, okay? So I know they're not parallel because they're not the same. Now I got to decide if they're perpendicular. Well, they did flip it, but because they're both negative, they did not change the sign, so they're not perpendicular, so these guys would be neither. All right, number 7, okay, neither one of these is in slope-intercept form, so I got to get both of these y's by themselves in slope-intercept form so I could look at their slopes, okay? So over here, I'm going to have 3x, here I'll do it in purple, 3x plus 10y equals 14. I'm going to have to subtract 3x from both sides to get this y by itself. These are not like terms, so I can't put them together. And now I'm going to divide everything by 10. I'm going to use my fraction button, and I'm going to get y equals negative 3 over 10x plus 7 over 5. All right, y'all, when you look at this, you will look at your slopes and realize that they both have, this guy has a slope of negative 3 over 10. Okay? To solve this guy, I need you to be careful. I need you to go add a negative in front of that 28. I've got 6x plus 2y equals negative 28. Again, I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides because I'm trying to get that y by itself. So I'm going to have 2y equals negative 6x minus 28. Oh, sorry, this is a 20y. That's my fault. All right, now I'm going to divide everything by 20 to get that y by itself. And I'm going to get y equals a negative 3 over 10x minus 7 over 5. All I care about in this problem is the slope. Well, I know my slope is a negative 3 over 10, and this guy had a slope of negative 3 over 10. They are the same slopes, which means these lines are parallel. All right, on number 8, it says, write the equation of a line that passes through the point 2, negative 2, and is perpendicular to the given line. So I've got a point right here, and to write it in an equation, I need a point and a slope so that I can write it in point slope form. All right, so I've got my point. I need to find my slope. Well, y'all, it says it's perpendicular to this line. Well, the slope of that line is 1/2. So perpendicular to 1/2, I have to flip it, which is going to make it 2 over 1, and change the sign, which is going to make it a negative 2 over 1, which I'm going to simplify that to a negative 2. All right, when I go to point slope, I'm going to have y minus my y1. Well, my y1 is a negative 2, so when I put it in, I got to make it positive, equals my slope, which I'm now using a negative 2, parentheses, x minus 2. All right, that's in point slope. If you wanted to get slope intercept, you could keep distributing. So we're going to distribute. I'm going to have a y plus 2 equals negative 2x plus 4, because a negative times a negative is a positive. To get this y by itself, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, and I would have y equals negative 2x plus 2. Last thing you want to go back in and check is that your slopes are perpendicular, which I've got a 1/2 and a negative 2, so we're good to go. All right, now we're getting into Unit 2 on functions, okay? So review, your domain is your x, your range is your y, and your rule for a function is that x cannot repeat. All right, so when I go in and do this, my domain is all my x's, and you have to list them from least to greatest. So I'm going to have negative 7, negative 3, negative 2, 4, and 6. You got lucky. They already listed those from least to greatest for you. When I list my range, that's going to be all my y's. My smallest y is a negative 1. Then I've got 0, 1, 4, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There you go. There's my domain and my range, and now I have to know if it's a function. Well, none of these x's repeated, so yes, this is a function. All right, on number 10, again, I got to list out my domain and my range. My domain is x, my range is y. So when I list out my x's, I'm going to do it from least to greatest. Negative 1 is the smallest, then 0, then 6, then 7. You don't have to list those zeros twice. When I do my range, again, I got to go from least to greatest. Well, the smallest y is negative 7, then negative 3, negative 2, and a positive 2. I want to know if this is a function or not, and it's going to be no, this is not a function because my x's repeat. I've got 2 zeros, so no, it's not a function. All right, on number 11, let's start by figuring out if it's a function or not. Remember, we're going to draw a vertical line through it. It only passes it once, so yes, that's a function. And now I got to talk about my domain and range. Remember, your domain is x and your range is y. So I'm going to come along this x-axis. Well, y'all, there's arrows on it, and I know if this is a v, it's an absolute value graph, which means that my domain is always going to be negative infinity to positive infinity, okay? For my range, I'm going to see how low it starts on this graph, okay? Where does it start at the bottom of this graph? I'm going to trace along my y-axis, and it starts right here at negative 2, and there's arrows on it, which means it goes to infinity. So I'm going to have from negative 2 to infinity, okay? Remember, I'm putting a bracket on this because it touches negative 2, and you can't touch infinity, so that's why that guy's a parentheses. All right. It wants us to evaluate this function, okay? 1 is my input. That means everywhere there's an x, I'm going to put a 1. I must put parentheses around it, so this is going to be parentheses 1 squared minus 8 parentheses 1 plus 14. Okay, you're going to type this in your calculator just like that. And you should get 23. All right, 13 is sorry, this is spazzing. 13 is a composite function because it's a little circle, and you have to remember that on a composite function, you must start on the inside, and then you go to the outside. So when I look at this guy right here, my inside is h of 10. So I'm going to put 10 into the h function first. And I'm going to have negative 2 parentheses 10 squared plus 4 parentheses 10. When I put that in my calculator, you should get negative 160. So that was my inside function. Now it's got to go to the outside. Well, I'm just going to carry down this g. So it's now going to go into the outside function, which is my g. So everywhere there's an x in the g function, I'm going to put a negative 160 plus 2. When I put that in my calculator, I'm going to get a negative 158, which is your output right there. Okay, 14 is different. This is a multiplication sign. So this tells me that I'm going to put 1 into both my functions. 1's also going to go into this function because it's not a composite function. I'm going to see what the answers are to both of these. This guy was 7. This guy is, I think, negative 1. We're going to take our two numbers and we're going to multiply them times each other to get a solution of negative 7. So my range or my output of this is negative 7. All right, we got to write a function rule for number 15. Two things for a function rule. You need a start and you need a rate of change. Remember, your start is when x equals 0. Well, right now it's not on this graph, so I'm going to go find my rate of change first. I'm going to see how it's changing every time. Well, y'all, if I look here, we're adding 5 every time. Adding 5, adding 5. But I do need to go double check my x. On my x, I'm adding 2, adding 2, adding 2. We need to remember that our rate of change is y over x. Well, my y is changing by 5 and my x is changing by 2. So my rate of change is going to be 5 over 2. My start is when x equals 0. So I got to get back to when x is equal to 0. Well, if I follow this pattern to go backwards, I'm going to subtract 2, which would get me to 0. So to go backwards here, I'm going to subtract 5, and 5 minus 5 is 0. Okay, so 0, 0 is my start. So I need to know the y coordinate, which is 0. Okay, when I write this as a function rule, my rate of change comes first. That goes with your x because that's like your slope. So 5 over 2x plus my y coordinate is right here, which is 0. All right, on 16, again, we need a start and we need a rate of change. Okay, my start is when x equals 0. Well, you got lucky because they gave it to you, and you have 0, and your y is 0. So my start's going to be 0. I need to go in and find my rate of change. Well, to get from here to here, I'm going to add 4, add 4, add 4. To get from here to here, I'm adding 1, adding 1, adding 1. So remember, your rate of change is going to be your y over your x. In this case, it's going to be 4 over 1, which is just 4. When I write this as a function rule, I got to have my rate of change, which is 4. Your x has to go with your rate of change, plus your start, which we said is 0. All right, last one, number 17, okay? So it gave me a sequence. It wants me to write the recursive formula, the explicit formula, and find the 49th term, okay? The only thing you need for your recursive formula is the common difference. All right, so remember, to find your common difference, you're going to take the number in front and subtract it from the one behind. So when I do 13 minus 3, I get 10. That is my common difference. So I'm going to come put this into my recursive formula. which the only thing I need to replace is the difference, which in this case is 10. The explicit needs two things. It needs your A1 and your difference. I already know my difference is 10. Well, my A1 is my very first term, which the very first term here is 3. Now I'm just going to come put this in my explicit formula. I'm going to have A of n equals my A1 plus my difference, parentheses, n minus 1. Okay, that is my explicit formula. Because these are formulas, they're still going to have the n in them. Okay, but if I want to find the 46th term, that's the nth term, so I'm going to use the formula that I just created. I'm going to put 46 in for n, and now I'm just going to type this whole thing in my calculator just how it is, and you should get 454.